Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des. This is Atticus. I don't know if he popped on the sound. I'm a serial content creator. Atticus is a serial cuddler. And today for a special episode, which I'm pretty excited about. So a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, if my timing is correct, we did a podcasting basics episode. And all y'all seem to really like that. I got some of the best feedback about episodes in a long time. So, if that's what you want, that's what we're going to give you. And because of that, I'm also trying to figure out how many times I can say that in a sentence. But because of that, we have a special guest who I think is probably going to be a consistent guest on the podcast. Mr. Dean Williams.
Hello.
I'm hoping you edit in some crowd sounds there.
No.
You should.
No.
Please.
I am not. Nobody, no crowd is cheering for me, trust me.
Except they are.
Yeah.
Our listeners like you.
Well, there's no accounting for taste.
Hey, but it's a good podcast. Anyways, okay. So, we were talking about how to kind of incorporate more of these actionable episodes, because if you're not working on yourself and thinking through things and getting ideas around how you interact with people at work and as you run your business and things, those are all cool. But actionable steps are also pretty awesome. And since podcasting is one of the things nearest and dearest to my heart, we were talking about, well, what comes after the podcasting basics? And so Dean and I were talking, and I was like, well, in theory, if someone's kind of following through this process, if they listen to the episode, then all of a sudden they have this really cool content, but nothing that identifies it as such. Maybe a name, maybe a brand concept. But in terms of if you were to go to iTunes and go to upload it, or go to Libsyn and go to upload it, you wouldn't have a critical piece. You would get an error message, insert podcast art here. So that's what we're talking about today.
I don't think that's a direct quote, but it says something to that effect.
It's a red asterisk and very bold and very upset. Yeah. So, to kick it off, assuming you have a name, because we've talked a bit before about branding. Dean's been on the podcast before, and we've talked about branding and what's in a name. Have we talked about what's in a name?
I think we did. Did we talk about making sure you can get, as soon as you possibly can, get your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, whatever, anything you can get handles?
Hot tip, as soon as you can, get all those things. I've been super lazy about that, and actually over the last couple weeks made semi-automatic decisions around not having a Sugar and Spikes Twitter. But I think for the sake of the brand, it'd probably be good to have.
Yeah, and a good idea is to when you've got a name that you're feeling good about, or even if you're not feeling super good, if you think of a name, go get the Twitter for it, because you can always deactivate it later.
Yeah.
But
or you can just sit on it.
Or you could sit on it. Yeah.
Be one of those people.
There's plenty of those.
Oh yeah. Also, if you have the funds, get the URL.
Yep.
Because that's also just really good to have. And you can get URLs for pretty inexpensive. It's the hosting that costs the money, but like holding a domain can be cheap.
Yeah.
Um,
Between 10 and $20 a year.
yeah. I mean, I've definitely let a lot go recently, but that's like,
They weren't getting use.
well, they weren't getting use. And when you think about this ties into the larger like building a brand thing, but like, where's the brand going? What is the goal of the brand? Things like that. There were things where I was like, not for now. And then when you kind of like weigh the decision around different like .coms, .edus, .vip, insert cool 3 letters here, like you can let them kind of go for a bit until you need them. Which goes back to one of the consistent messages that I hope people hear, which is your brand, your business, your career trajectory can ebb and flow and be what you want in the moment. And just because you made one decision at one point doesn't mean you have to stick with that decision.
Yeah. If it stops working for you, then let it go.
Yeah, exactly. And focusing on certain things at certain times can be one of the best ways to spend your energy. I'm going to bring back around to podcast art.
Yes.
So, if you have an audio file and it's an awesome podcast episode, but you're like, I don't know what to do. Libsyn's giving me an error. I know I need podcast art, but what does that mean? Welcome to our episode. Our goal is that you will listen to this and be fully armed with the tools and ideas that you need to not only have podcast art that gets through, but also stands out and get you the listeners that you want. One thing that I'm pretty excited about is towards the end of the episode, we're going to go through and kind of critique our season 2 art, because we are coming up on season 3. I cannot believe that, but Sugar and Spice is coming up on season 3, and with that, we've been doing our own kind of critiques and reviews of our art and where we want to go. So you guys are going to get to listen in on that, which is super exciting. But I guess to kick it off, what are the basics? Like when I came to you and I said, I need podcast art for this podcast that I'm making, I have these audio files. What did you want to know?
Well, my first question is always, how big does it need to be? And I mean, that's my first. That's always my first question, because that definitely affects what I can do.
Well, and this is assuming the name is created and kind of the brand identity is
Right.
done, right?
Yeah.
Like that is a really big caveat. Like you have to have that kind of, your logo's been done, your lockup's been done, things like that are already created.
Yeah.
And then you're plugging it into this new kind of line of your brand.
Right. Yeah. So your podcast art is going to be, I mean, it's basically it's your album art.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody was like, someone's perusing through the Sam Goody, because that's a nice topical reference.
I was like, I
they're
don't
looking
think
at your-
anybody listening knows what that is.
Well, maybe not. FYE still exists, sort of. It came back.
FYE, it apparently exists in the Midwest. What's another thing? Tower Records.
That's a good one.
Oh, Virgin Megastore.
Mhm.
I wish that when I had the Virgin, so I have like the Virgin credit card. I wish that all the money I spent at the Virgin Megastore as a kid transferred to points. That would have been awesome.
That would have been great. It would have had several plane tickets. By that
Oh
point.
my god.
Anyway,
Yeah.
So you're for anybody that's never been to a Sam Goody or was not alive while Sam Goody existed,
Mhm.
it basically, like, it's, I mean, everyone knows what a record store is.
Yeah.
You
I
go to a
would
record
hope.
store, or
You're browsing that like weird little corner of Target.
sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, album art.
Yeah.
You're seeing, that's kind of, I mean, at one point, it was like records, and so it was, album art was a really big thing,
Mhm.
because you had 12 inches by 12 inches,
Mhm.
and it would put big great album
Mhm.
art, intricate details.
It'd be cool.
Yeah.
People were seeing it like right up front.
And the and your, like, the name, the album name, band name, and all that would like be kind of smaller on a lot of them. It was mostly art.
Yeah.
To be eye catching. Nowadays, you need it to be able to be readable at the size of a postage stamp.
You need to convey your brand in a thumbnail.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep. So you want to start out with making it as big as possible because that basically future proofs you. However, you want to design it such that you can read it as small as possible.
Okay, yeah. So I was going to say, like, if I'm looking at this giant file and I have all of these tiny words and all of these intricate images and things like that, that's not what I want.
Correct.
I want something that is big, like a bold billboard, but could have the same effect as. So why not design like in like the 300 by 300 square?
Well, so currently, the minimum upload for iTunes podcast art is 1400 pixels square.
Okay.
But it's changing. It used to be 300 pixels, and it's just been going up because as displays have gotten better, you have more pixels per inch in a screen. And I mean, print resolution has stayed pretty constant at 300. It's the equivalent of 300 pixels per inch. It doesn't quite work out like that because print is weird, and printers use dots of ink.
So DPI.
Yes, but DPI is measured in. It's complicated.
It's different.
It's different. There are a lot more dots per inch. Like a printer will say something like 2400 to 9600 dots per inch, and that's how many little tiny ink dots. But it like 1 pixel would be several hundred dots of ink. Because they're only working with 4 colors. So they're going to do like, a 60-40 split of red and yellow is going to be different from a 50-50 split. And so they can get all the colors. Anyway, so you want to design it so that it can be seen small, but you want to give yourself as much room as possible because the older podcast art that was designed and uploaded for 300 pixels by 300 pixels, that's not even close to the minimum anymore.
Right.
And so now it's, their current spec as of today is between 1400 and 3000 pixels.
Today
square.
Being sometime
August
in
2019.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to give yourself room to grow. Assuming because I mean, you may just decide you're so happy with your podcast art, you want to use it for years. Which can be a good thing. I mean,
a lot of podcasts do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, the very long running podcasts will a lot of the time have, the same podcast art for a very long time. But if you suddenly, like, if Apple ups their minimum and now you're below the minimum,
you're gonna have to, like,
if that's all you've
recreate it.
got, you'd have to recreate it, because you want it to be a good, like a high quality image, because they will, if it becomes like, if it looks pixelated, or like if there's like JPEG relicking relics, digital artifacts in the image, then Apple won't promote your podcast, which they may not do anyway, but
you want everything in your favor.
Yeah. It's better to be able to be promoted and not be than to just not be able to be promoted.
So when someone's looking up, like, how big should I make my podcast art, when in doubt, veer towards the maximum size.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say even just make it bigger. Like, this is one of those times when make it bigger is absolutely the way to go.
So, like, if it was a square, like, is it just you need to know, it needs to be a square? So right now, like, the minimum's like 1200. If I made it like a 3600, square, like pixels.
That'll get you a lot more time.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can go like make it 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really easy to make things smaller.
Mm-hmm.
It is impossible to reliably make things bigger.
Right. Okay.
Downsizing art is always easier than upsizing.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of like a good guidepost for folks that want to start off. Like if I were to start off, or if you were to make our season 3 art right now, where would you start? Like what size would you make it?
Well, that depends on if you are using, like, if you're using like a photograph,
Mm-hmm.
just however big you can get the photo.
That's true. Photos are
Um,
completely different than kind of vector images and things like that.
Yeah, so the Sugar and Spikes art is vector,
Mm-hmm.
and vector art is not pixels.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is like, so raster art is pixels.
Mm-hmm.
Vector art is basically math.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a series of calculations saying that there's a point here and a point here and a line connecting them.
Mm-hmm.
And curves of varying definitions, which means you can blow that up to a mile wide
Mm-hmm.
and it will be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to use vector art and have that kind of more illustrative style for your podcast art, then by all means do that, because that will be that. I mean, that 100% free. Well, not 100%, because if file formats change, that'll be basically it.
Yeah.
Like size wise, you'll always have exactly what you need.
I mean, that speaks to why so many of the podcast art, so many podcast art out. I don't even know how to say that plural, but why so many are in more of that illustrated format versus the picture of someone. Like I can't think of.
Gilmore Guys.
Okay. Thank you. It's the one thing.
I mean, there are a lot of
There are a lot, but for the most part, like if you think NPR, things like that, kind of your big guns,
yeah, a lot
as
of
you
them
will.
a lot of them
they're-
are illustrative and done as vector art. And yeah, that'll get you a lot more mileage.
It's more evergreen, yeah. Okay. So aside from size, what else should people be thinking about?
Well, you want it to be readable, as small as possible, which means don't have anything with like really delicate details. Don't have a lot of text. Just looking through the ones like that I'm subscribed to currently, you've got things like I love Laura's podcast art. It's a
so
gray
simple.
background with lore, and it's a very distinctive font, but it is like that is the whole of the art, and it's readable. I mean, I can cover it up with my thumb, but it's 100% readable.
Yeah.
You've got things like Song Exploder, just a big E. So it doesn't necessarily have to have your full title on the album art or on the podcast art. Most do, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
What are your thoughts? I know we briefly touched about like pictures versus kind of vector art or illustrative styles. What are your thoughts on people using their picture as the cover art, like a headshot essentially?
Yeah, I mean, if that's your brand, then by all means go for it. Just get a really get a high quality picture, which that's always useful. Having a really big, high quality, well photographed headshot of yourself, that's always good to have.
Speaking from a creator standpoint, and as someone who's kind of managed this podcast as well as others, I will say there have been a lot of times where I've been glad that it wasn't just kind of the co-host picture, things like that, especially as like we've grown and flexed in just behind the scenes conversations. Like Sugar and Spikes as a brand is bigger than Tammy and I. It's bigger than, me and a guest. Or
Yeah.
if I wanted to bestow upon someone like an episode that they just kind of ran with,
Yeah.
there it lends a sort of flexibility.
Hmm.
Um, and I've been glad that we haven't just had this sort of stagnant headshot thing going on, which has also come up in another podcast that I produce where we did use more of a headshot style art. And then because of like rotating hosts, rotating guests, things like
And
that,
added
and
and added hosts.
yeah, added hosts, different guests, just the flexibility of what a podcast is, which is essentially like a delivery method of information. Because of that rotation, we changed out from that headshot style after about 7 or 8 months to a more evergreen kind of version.
Mhm.
So I will say that Dean's right. Like if your face is your brand and that's all it's ever gonna be, then cool. If it's something bigger, then something that allows you a bit more flexibility can be very important and nice to have.
Mhm.
Because I will say, like, promoting it, like, I get that, if Tammy's unavailable one week, like, people aren't gonna be like, well, why is she on the cover? But it's someone else. Like, I get people aren't gonna like hold us to the fire like that. It also just feels nice. Like when you
Yeah.
have a brand, you care about those nuances. And again, like the evergreenness of our cover has just been like a comfort in the times when there's been other stresses and I didn't need that other piece of, well, that's annoying,
Yeah.
you know?
And it doesn't mean you can't use headshots.
Exactly.
You use those for, promo pictures, social media posts.
Yeah.
Like
Pitches to other podcasts.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean like Gilmore Guys, they would do
Mhm.
like, and a lot of podcasts I think do this. They'll put up promo pictures of the hosts
Mhm.
with whoever their guest is if
Yeah.
you're in the same area.
Yeah.
They'll do a picture of
Mhm.
everybody that's on that one episode to
Mhm.
promote that episode.
Yeah.
Um
What we do is you made kind of like a layered image where we ask folks for their headshot and then we just like drop it behind the rest of like our logo and where you can find the podcast.
yeah. And it's got some space for the episode number
Mhm.
and the guest name, nice and big, so it's readable, and then a little bit about them, um, very very short blurb.
Is there like a minimum font size for those types of things?
Well, your font size is gonna vary based on how big your image is,
Mhm.
but I would say you want it. I mean, you want to take it down. So if you zoom out to where, if you can cover the image with your thumb,
Mhm.
like cover the whole image with your thumb,
Mhm.
you still want it to be readable enough at
Mhm.
that size.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, yeah, you can get closer to it,
Mhm.
but still, like if you can put your thumb on the screen and cover
Mhm.
it, then that's about the size you want it to be mostly readable
Mhm.
at. And there might be other stuff, like you can put other stuff on there that's not readable at that size.
Mhm.
But like another Aaron Mankey podcast, Cabinet of Curiosities, one of his newer ones, it has the title and it says Cabinet of Curiosities. At the
Mhm.
top, it says Aaron Mankey's
Mhm.
Cabinet of Curiosities. Like, so it has his name. It's very small. You can't really read it in thumbnail size,
Mhm.
but you have enough.
Mhm.
You can see what the podcast is.
Mhm.
So, you can. It doesn't all have to be readable, but enough of it has to be like you don't want to be trying to figure out what
Mhm.
it says
Yeah.
or what it is.
You got to be able to get the gist.
Yeah.
Mhm. Um we kind of started talking about it in terms of like guest headshots and everything. What sort of images do you need to be prepared to kind of like have in your arsenal of graphics to, like having cover art is one thing, but then talking about it, like you don't just want to show like the same cover all the live long day, maybe you do. What are your thoughts on like alternative imagery and things like that?
Well, I know that Libsyn can do episode art.
Mm-hmm.
I have not yet figured out where that shows up.
It shows up when you do the embed.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So so you can have those for individual episodes. That's great. You also probably want to. I mean, you'll need social media images.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one where, like, if you get your assets as big as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So any photos you're using, get them as big as possible. Then you can, resize them and create yourself,
Mm-hmm.
like your Facebook cover photos, your
Mm-hmm.
Twitter images, um, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And those I won't even touch on sizes here.
Yeah.
You can like whatever year you're in, you Google social media image
Uh,
cheat sheet with the current year.
mm-hmm.
You will find plenty.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of them are like there are a lot of great ones out there, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll give you all of the dimensions.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, you can find the ones that have like this is what size you want to upload it at. Here is what will be visible on mobile.
Mm-hmm.
Like so, it's really nice because it lets you keep the important things in the portion of the image that will be
Mm-hmm.
shown on everything.
Mm-hmm. Just as a 2019 lazy girls hack, one thing that I've definitely been known to do to promote the podcast is I will go to either iTunes, Spotify, or even Overcast and take a screenshot of this week's episode, make it square, and then post that to Instagram. And that does currently seem to meet kind of the criteria of if you put your thumb over it, like, so it gets down to that thumbnail size
Mhm.
and it's still readable, like in my feed and everything. And you don't get that pixelation. So there is some creative ways to create promotional images. I think when I go to promote individual episodes and stuff, it's not just a matter of sharing that it's a podcast, but so much of it comes down to copy and content within the post as well, and making sure to always drive people where to listen. Um but so besides so I'm not sure if we kind of covered the types to have because they're what's kind of the rotation that we work with. We work with kind of cover art,
Mhm.
right? And then the guest headshots that we have that template for, and then audiograms are another really good and highly valuable way to promote.
And what is an audiogram?
Audiograms are where you have either an image or your cover art, anything like that with a snippet of your episode playing or snippet of audio playing on it. So if we look at like in my feed, there's one with Noelle right now where it shows it and it turns it into a like little bit of a transcript. Those are really great because you're essentially working with an image that becomes a video, so you're kind of hacking the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we know, preference is given to videos.
Yeah.
And then if people are scrolling with like the sound on, then they get a taste of the episode, which is really nice.
And you said that does a transcript, so
Mhm.
it has subtitles and everything.
Yeah.
That is fantastic because I mean
Mhm.
I don't know about most people, but I think that a lot of people these days they're not going to be like if you're scrolling through
Mhm.
something, you're not going to have the sound on.
It's like
a lot of the time.
it's in the 90%.
Yeah.
It's
So
in like the mid 90s. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I was looking into it for work stuff and it's definitely extremely high. You want things to be enjoyable and for your audience to interact with them with no sound.
yeah, when I find it like when I scroll past a video on Facebook and it doesn't have subtitles, I will often just scroll away
Yeah.
just out of like well, why am I even looking at this? I
Yeah.
can't tell what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm not going to turn on the sound.
Well, and with everyone I've talked with, so a pretty small end, but still like random opinions anyway. What happens a lot of times is people will read the subtitles and then be interested in it and then like be in a place where they can turn the sound on or like have that decision to turn the sound on, and they do, and they rewatch it, which only helps
Yeah.
your account.
Right.
So subtitles and transcripts are key, not just for the, well, this is good for the algorithms, but it's also if we think of you know, uh people that can't hear and things like that. Like you want to be able to hit as many people as you can. So being able to read it or hear it if people are browsing it through an audio only type of experience. It's important.
And so what kind of tools are there for creating these audiograms?
So for audiogram, I was using Wave, but it was unnecessarily spendy, and I switched to Headliner, which is awesome. You get 10 watermark free audiograms a month, up to 10 minutes. So 10 up to 10 minutes a month.
Wow.
So in theory, you could get 100 minutes, give or take, free each month, which is awesome. So I started using that. It's a bit slow, but it works, and it, like I said, it does the transcripts for you. Wave wasn't doing that, things like that. So Headliner is great, and I think also we did want to touch on kind of the other tools to make these images, like the podcast art, the promo art, things like that.
Mhm.
So aside from Headliner, because that assumes you have the art,
Right.
what tools would you recommend or at least acknowledge exist to make things happen?
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that most people don't have access to. I use Adobe Creative Cloud
Mhm.
because I use it for work and I already
Mhm.
have it.
Mhm.
It's
It's like
I
why we use Audition, because it's there.
that's
Mhm.
that's the same reason I use Audition
Yeah.
to edit the podcast, because it's part of it and I'm
Mhm.
already paying for it. I would not. I honestly wouldn't recommend just getting Creative Suite
No.
unless you're gonna use it.
Yes.
It's like it is really much. It costs more than it's worth.
Well, and it is its own degree. Like
Yeah,
it
that's
is complicated.
yeah. Most of my graphic design degree was
Mhm.
learning thing. Well, maybe not most, but like
Mhm.
half. My first year of my
Mhm.
graphic design degree was just learning
Mhm.
the software.
I think for like you marketers out there, or if you are building like a long-standing brand as an entrepreneur and things, then definitely learning enough to be dangerous in Creative Cloud is essential. I can speak to the fact that in my full-time job, I've had to switch to Creative Cloud because using the alternative methods such as Canva and stuff have just been too restricting for what
Yeah,
what I've needed to do. So I think when you think like growth path, it's something that may end up coming up unless you outsource.
yeah,
Like that's why I have someone else doing everything else for me.
yeah. And I mean, as far as software, there's other things you can use.
Mhm.
Um, so like I use Adobe Illustrator, but
Mhm.
if you want something free, there's like Inkscape,
Mhm.
which is getting better every day, and
Yeah.
from what I hear, it's pretty comparable.
Mhm.
Um, you've got um, Canva, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
for page layout.
They have a
I
lot of social media stuff.
it's
That's their bread and butter.
Yeah, their bread and butter is social media, and I don't like it because
It's not a great user experience, but it'll get the job done.
it'll get the job done for a lot of things, and I mean it's good for what it does, but
Mhm.
I am just so used to having a lot more control and a lot
Mhm.
more granular.
Mhm.
um like I can't get the precision that I'm
Yeah,
looking for out of it,
which I don't understand. They don't have.
but it is good
Mhm.
for, like, if
What
you're
it
just
is.
doing, I mean, I would say if you're doing it for just like podcast art and
Mhm.
episode art, that it totally works.
Yeah.
I've tried to do more than it can do,
Mm-hmm.
and for that, no.
Yeah, and if you spend a lot of time in it, it starts to get wonky, which means just like a lot of refreshing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are other alternatives. If you Google Creative Cloud alternatives
Mm-hmm.
or like Photoshop alternative, Illustrator alternative, there's plenty out there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So many tools. And it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like these are things, as with so many of the other topics that we talk about on the podcast, like take what works for you, leave the rest. I really don't want folks to get bogged down in the different alternatives and feeling like they have to learn new software things. Honestly, for about 70 to 80% of people out there, Canva is going to do you just fine.
Yeah.
And then really this leads us into, well, what happens if you want to do like a bigger change, a drastic change, things like that. I mentioned like this is why I outsource. Like know thy limits, right? But kind of leaning into that topic, what about when you want to change your cover art? Like you mentioned that a lot of podcasts keep it the same. At what point is it kind of beneficial to create new cover art? What do you need to think about when you're thinking about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it that's a really there is no real hard
Right
and
or
fast
wrong?
answer to that. But if it's not if it's not working for you
Mm-hmm.
anymore,
Mm-hmm.
or uh, if it doesn't reflect what your podcast is really about
Mm-hmm.
anymore, if it's not reflective of your brand,
Mm-hmm.
then consider changing it.
Yeah. We updated cover art between season 1 and season 2. Mainly, we went for lighter colors to make noting things and stuff on the cover art a little bit easier, because initially in season 1 we had a really high contrast, which is good. Like you want things that'll stand out and have some definition contrast, but with the style that we had going, it was bit harder and we needed something just a little softer. Like we learned what we were looking for after working with it for about a year.
Yeah, and we've got high contrast where
Mm-hmm.
it counts.
Mm-hmm.
So the logo stands out against the
Mm-hmm.
background, and
Yeah.
that's the main thing.
Yeah. And now with season 3 coming up, what have been some things that you felt like needed changes, like the designer?
Well, one thing you want to do is you want to avoid like big the cliches.
Mm-hmm.
So like a business podcast, you probably don't want just a handshake
Mm-hmm.
because it's overplayed.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, for the more I think about it, the more the microphone
Mm-hmm.
is very much a cliche.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't see like movie posters don't have movie cameras
Mm-hmm.
on them
Yeah.
unless they're about movie
Movies.
making,
Yeah.
and even then, usually not.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have uh your podcast art having your method, like your distribution method,
Mm-hmm.
isn't maybe the greatest way to
Mm-hmm.
do it. Um, so I think maybe seeing if we can find something that's a little closer
Mm-hmm.
to showing what the podcast is actually about
Mm-hmm.
rather than how it's recorded.
Yeah. I would say that has been the biggest thing, but it's also taken us the couple years to find really the way we want to go with the podcast and finding our voice and everything. So as the podcast has grown and refined, so is our branding. we're still going to keep the name and things like that. But in talking with Dean and talking with Tammy, it's been, well, if you look at our name and the cover art, no one has any idea what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to solve the problem in one way, either change the name or change the art.
Right.
And that has been kind of what I have tasked Dean with coming up with by October, is art to describe everything that we talk about. I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I think if we were going to critique the rest of kind of the cover or like the art that we have been using, I mean, I think you're right. Like it's that it's pretty generic. Like it's well branded and it doesn't look like we just bought, stock stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't answer questions, which marketing needs to do, is answer questions. And the other thing is there's a lot of like empty space around it that's not usable when you need it to be usable.
Yeah.
Which is difficult. So and I think that speaks to thinking through the cover art and what it may be used for. And these are learnings that again have happened over the last couple of years. When we were making the podcast art, we weren't thinking about like tossing in quotes or, well, where's the transcript going to go, things like that.
Right.
These are all things that have come up as we think about what's the easiest flow for marketing, what communicates the most, the fastest,
Mm-hmm.
and what conveys the brand.
Yeah.
So that is our critique of season 2. And like I mentioned, season 3 is coming very fast in October, which is super exciting. Any final design sentiments, not questions, but answers, comments?
I don't think that I can answer, like, there's always something else.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there are a ton of resources for every aspect of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is to find one that speaks to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're like, that's why the like you talk about doing a podcast about something, even if somebody else is doing a similar one,
Mm-hmm.
because your voice might be what somebody,
What someone hears.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that like I would there's also other resources for learning more about
Mm-hmm.
podcast art and about podcasting in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean I'd be thrilled if this was a jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
But also I'm not going to claim to be the voice that
end all
speaks
be
to
all.
most people. So I think just like
But
get
if
out
people
there.
do like your voice, and if people do want to learn more about you and maybe like talk about helping them with their art or even like doing a consultation, where can folks find more about you?
You can find some of my work at deanwdesign.com,
Mm-hmm.
Including the Sugar and Spikes podcast art.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Season 1 and season 2.
Season 1 and 2 are both up there. I think they're both up there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find out more about me if that's what floats your boat. And yeah, that's about it. I'm not really active on social media.
Cool. All right. Well, we are as Sugar and Spikes. You can find us on the Instagram, Sugar and Spikes Pod. This is kind of where we live and breathe. You can find me, myself, and I at DesWMSMBA across the board. And as always, if you want to reach out to either me or Dean or Tammy, go to sugarandspikespod.com. There's a form. And If you like this episode, leave a review. That would be amazing. Even just selecting a number of stars would be greatly appreciated. And if you know someone else that could benefit from this episode or any of the other episodes, go ahead and share this with that individual. That would be fabulous. Okay, bye.
See ya.